Hello, my name is Joshua, and first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. Um, this is going to be more of a philosophical observational video, and what I would like to talk about in this video is basically the difference between a creative person and a typical person. So, first and foremost, I would like to say that creative people are not typical people. This is why the idea or the belief that creativity is something that's shared by others is something I adamantly dislike, not simply because um, there isn't just the evidence. Well, so yeah, mostly because there's not the evidence for this belief, and also because I think that if everyone is creative, then we really misappropriate or understand what creativity is. So, first, let me give some reasons as to why people say everyone's creative, and then we can go from there. One thing that is true is that no child really has a very sufficiently developed prefrontal cortex, and in fact, for the most part of everybody's early years, they don't have a fully functioning left hemisphere. So, most of our thoughts, the thoughts of a children, are given by way of the right hemispheric attention to things that do not come down to procedural knowing or understanding, but are much more imagistically based, vigilant in scope, and more about ideas and ways of seeing the world that are embedded and rested within context. And then at the ages about 9 years old, all kids, even starting from the ages of, I think it's up close to about 6, and for, I think, possibly individuals with high IQ, this may start even around 2 or 3, but the activity of the left hemisphere becomes more prominent, and children become less so uh, controlled by an attention to the world that is romantic, and as in idealizing, or it's not even to say idealizing, even perhaps one could say more realistic, because children, though they seem more fantastical, seem to pay a greater attention to the world. And this is not something that's merely a fact of philosophy or age or experience. This is something I do take issue with Robert Greene and what he talks about, because he thinks that fundamentally the difference between children and adults are that children are dependent on survival, and so they're better at learning because they don't know anything and they feel inferior, and it's this feeling of inferiority and a fundamental dependency on others that leads them to be more uh, capable of implicitly learning what is up from down from others. And so this is why kids are um, for better at doing things like learning. And kids are, to a certain extent, better at learning certain things than adults, but most kids cannot learn certain things um, prior to a certain age, because they do not have the cognitive architecture to acquire said knowledge. And so, um, go figure, the facts would say that there's something more to the picture. And um, why this is relevant in a discussion about how creative are people generally is because when people talk about the lack of creativity in other people, they usually say that schools kill creativity, or it is our acculturation that kills our creativity. But from a neurological perspective, for most people, especially if they're not left handed, the temperamental shift is due to a shift in cognitive perspective or takes on the world that is going to happen for every person, whether they want it to be that way or they do not want it to be that way. And so when you lose this take on the world that is broadly vigilant, embedded within context, meaning making, and prospectively generating, and best suited for interpreting visual information, metaphor, and analogy, then, well, guess what? So too is your ability to produce original or new ideas going to diminish. And that is a feature of cognition. That's a feature of human cognition. That is not a feature of, let's say, just the activity of schools or parents. Now, children, so that's the reason why people believe that everyone is creative, because factually or from our own experience, it is sort of true that all children are creative. It is true from a general standpoint, though all children have different personalities. And so this is why personality is becoming a more confusing thing for me to understand, because I'm just exactly trying to figure out what makes personality other than temperamental factors. Because if it's not the case that most of the left hemisphere is myelinated, then I'm not sure what. So I'm not sure. I would just put it like that. And so, but all kids have different personalities, though. No child is less left hemispherically oriented for most of their early years. And from the ages of, say, around 6 to 9, everybody's left hemisphere becomes more functionally operational, and everybody becomes more capable of being able to think procedurally, better understand language from a concrete and operational standpoint, form more coherent sentences, articulate frames of thought, and deal with very fine, detailed, fixed, decontextualized, and well understood aspects of knowledge. We all become little sense makers and have a capacity to understand our sense making and the sense making of other people's brains. And through education in Western society, we become more conscious and aware of our differences in sense making and the faults in sense making that can be a part of our cognitive architecture. And what schools really try to do is say that the people who have the best ability to determine the faults in their sense making and the faults of their sense making in others around various topics are the most capable or the most societally desired individuals, is what I would call them. Because this is not a discussion on intelligence, and we can honestly discuss what really makes somebody intelligent in another video. But being agreeable and conscientious, to my mind, is not necessarily that, because I don't think anybody would consider dogs. Well, no. Anyways, I'm not gonna say what I think. Anyways, there's a reason why schools value what they value, and so that's how I would put it. And I think that moving from this picture, the other reason why people think everyone is creative is because everyone has an imagination. Everyone has an imagination. And our imaginations are predicated pretty much on the same neurological. When I say neurological, I mean brain regions. For the most part, we just assume that's the case. Nobody's been examined where if you were to give them a koan or to ask them to do something impromptu or spontaneous, or to solve a non-routine problem, or let's say if they have the skill of being able to play the saxophone and have some time of playing in a jazz band, perform an improvised solo or something of this nature. Anytime anybody does some activity like this within a laboratory setting, we can localize all individuals looked at thus far to certain brain regions that all people have. And so it's just a part of the normal architecture. And it's also the case that you can teach people how to have differing perspectives than the ones that may be most dominant to them, ourselves. So human beings have the capacity for theory of mind. And what I think theory of mind allows us to do is to wear the perspective of other individuals. Whenever you're learning mathematics or whenever you're learning certain subjects, your perspective attaining or learning a new way or style of attention and thought. And so that is, well, yeah, so that's what I would say learning is for the most part, in terms of what's relevant to this discussion on creativity. And because this capacity is fairly plastic in the sense that it can be manipulated. Let's just use that word. And why do I want to use the word manipulated? It's just because, take for instance, so let's talk about plasticity as a general phenomenon. Let's talk about plasticity as a general phenomenon first. And so plasticity is a very funny or interesting aspect of all organisms that is embedded within the structure of the existence of the thing, in the sense that if you have a lizard and you put it in an environment and you force it to be subjected to a certain set of pressures across a lifetime, and then you have the very same lizard and you put it in a different environment and you force it to be subjected to a certain type of pressures across its lifetime. When these things are the same species, if you bring the two lizards together and you look at them, there is going to be very obvious variation between the two. How obvious, or to what degree, and in what ways? Dice roll. It's as good as the experiment itself, I would say. But it is the case that all things adapt over time, very much so, whether people like to believe that or not. All things do, human beings included. And because human beings, we have theory of mind and we're cognitive creatures, our capacities to use our minds or to frame the world in different manners and perhaps take on different perspectives will change and can change over time. And one of the things that probably is most obvious to people is how sedentary perspectives and frames become in the minds of people, especially if people tend to stay in the same regions or have the same experiences. And probably the main motivation of culture and most religious activity is the unification of human perspectives. And part of the reason why people like myself resist these sorts of things is because, well, I'm creative, and I'll get more to why I say that. It's not to say that creative people are not going to be religious or something like that, but we'll get to why it's just the case that. So there's something, and so let's talk about it from this standpoint too. There's something also the case as it pertains to personality in terms of how plastic or perspectival seeking or easy it will be for people to take on the perspectives of others. This is referencing not only openness to experience but agreeableness or empathy, though I wouldn't say that agreeable people are necessarily the most empathic people in the world, though you tend to find it the case more times than not that a very agreeable person is going to be highly empathic, or in a certain way to say that they are better able to understand the thoughts, feelings, motivations, and intentions of others um, than other people. Now, what I would say, what I would say even further about this is that um, there are factors besides um, cognition that it's not very obvious to see from my vantage point of knowledge, because I don't think a lot of times people are doing experiments to look at the things that I tend to think about in my free time, because I'm not really sure why, but I don't find a lot of literature on it, to be honest. A lot of times I'll look up whatever, but I'm also not a trained neuroscientist or psychologist. And so that may be why I don't know who's talked about these things or done these sorts of experiments. But when I do listen to neuroscientists and psychologists, and when I do look at the different texts that are available to me, say on Amazon and whatnot, I don't find these topics looked at. A lot of the times, the topics that people investigate or look into are very much more based on global trends. I don't know if global trends is the right word. I would say based on culturally global trends. So, for instance, you're going to have a lot of neuroscientists in, say, Madurai, India, or whatever, looking at the relationship between neuroscience and Vedic text or philosophy. And so that's going to be a thing, and it may be a thing even here in America, because, or Western cultures, because we're more plugged into the perspectives of others in the world. We borrow other people's ideas all the dang time. And so, well, let's just follow that tangent just for a second. So, I said we borrow people's ideas all the time, and that's because ideas are products of perspectives. So, I know I'm using perspectives a lot, but perspectives are just best thought as filters that we place on our cognition. And so, why do I say filters that we place on our cognition? I don't know if that's not, none of this is accurate to say, because this is all metaphorical language. Because I'm trying to talk about very technical things that don't translate necessarily all that well. At least I'm trying to go through the business of translating them, but I have a other attention in my mind that thinks about, well, what about this? And like, what about this? And what about this? What about this? So that thing always stops me and slows me up in my presentation, because I always think that sucks. That's not good. What's wrong with that? And so on and so forth. And so, anyways, to stay on track, the truth of this perspectival nature of human cognition is that it's instantiated or mediated by several factors. So, emotions, personality, and learning and theory of mind. All of these things conglomerate to give us different frames of mind or reference to use in our thinking to understand other people and the world around ourselves. And so, yes, that is a human condition. Now, the reason why, and that's why people believe that everyone is creative, because the number of frames of references or perspectives, or how much theory of mind a person can have, and so on and so forth, can all be augmented, because our neurology and our capacity for thinking and feeling is all plastic. It's all very plastic, in the sense that human beings have a very large capacity, or no, wrong word, a very great capacity for learning, or or experiencing the phenomenon of plasticity, pretty much dependent on age. There is a sense that plasticity has an upper limit and tapers off severely around the ages of, let's say, 60 to 70. But even those people can still learn things. They can still develop their muscles. They can still do many different things until just about until they die. Um, how easy it becomes and what physical limitations or constraints are a part of their later existence or latter existence is something that's variable and mostly dependent on genetic factors and the lifestyle that they've maintained for most of their lifetime. But suffice to say that everybody ages, but how much age affects the way that you function is pretty much random and then determined by your lifestyle and the things that you choose to do and the ways that you choose to be across every moment of your existence. And so it is what it is. And so this is also why people think people are creative, because the way in which we evaluate creativity isn't just based on the actual capacities or productions or performances of people, but more so our capacity to always approach novelty. And maybe this is also why people don't look at it in neuroscience, because this is more of a philosophical or broad pattern. There never seems to be a limiting of human potential across time for any person. If people took the time to imagine what they could be or try to strive towards something that they are not, we have a very large capacity for self-transformation that for the most part goes unexploited in people. And so these kind of two broader visions and these two broader phenomenon, I think, which are pretty ubiquitous, lead people to say that everyone is creative. And it is the case that everyone's like this. And so I don't know if you want to call these things creativity, sure, fine. But the reason, and everybody, and so also everyone has an imagination. I was supposed to be getting to that one. So everybody has an imagination because everybody has dreams. So everybody dreams, everybody has dreams. Everybody has a right hemisphere, and everybody has a mythopoetic thinking self to themselves. And how much they're in touch or in tune with this aspect of themselves may have everything to do with their personality and how much Jung or psychedelic experiences they've had across their lifetime, or what people would ascribe to spiritual or esoteric experiences or religious phenomenology. And so there are personality factors that mediate that, but there are also environmental factors and all of these sorts of things, such that I'm not going to be able to like put a stake in it and say, here it is, as easy as I can for other things. It's a moving something. And so that's also why people think people are creative, because if anybody talks to you about their dreams, or anybody tells you what they're daydreaming about or thinking about while they're in a business board meeting, we notice that people's minds tend to go away from locality or be purely localized to the at-hand experience of themselves in the world at a particular moment. And so, yes, this is also why people say that people are creative. Now, all people have these capacities, and for all people, they're just sort of, we're like this. This is part of what it means to be human. But what about people who are more like this than everyone else? More like this than everyone else, such that you wouldn't describe their minds in the same way that you describe the minds of other people, but to say that their minds are more roaming. Very, very, very much so roaming. And what's a roaming mind? There are certain features that characterize it, like curiosity, and there's a reason why I think it's necessary to go into this other pictorial analysis, if one will. So take, for instance, I was talking about this with my fiance this morning. Take, for instance, people's attention to slugs. So everybody's seen a slug, but nobody really knows, well, so some people do. People who study slugs know a lot about slugs. Surprisingly, there are a lot of surprising facts about slugs, and the way that they fit into ecosystems and what they do. Now, I'm not saying that people have to look up slugs or whatever, but the point of this exercise is if you asked most people what's a slug, they have a title. They were told and taught at some time that this particular organism is what we all call a slug. Then they have maybe their casual experiences with the animal as it pertains to whatever they're doing in their vegetable garden or whatever. And that's what they think of a slug. Those experiences and what people say, and anything else that they tell you about the slug, if you ask them these things about what is a slug, is just rationalizations from their left hemisphere. Meaning that if you try to use any of these things to accurately predict something about a slug, good luck. If you try to use these things to understand a large multitude or collection of slugs across various regions of human experience, good luck. And if you were to try and use their ideas of a slug, say in a painting or a book, to represent something that they would call sluggish in nature, or a painting that represents some kind of thing that you would personify or analogize to being a slug, or whatever sluggish is, why we use those expressions or those words, people would just not get what's going on, or they would think it's dumb, or they'd be offended by it, or they'd be offended by it in the wrong way. So they would think it's stupid or something like that. So this is what I mean. So that's what I mean in the sense that they're just rationalizations. They're stories that people tell themselves because we know, well, so I'm not really sure why we talk. And I think we talk for communication or something like, so I'm not sure. I don't know anyways. But yes, people are very prone to rationalization, and the only people who are not, well, humans rationalize. We're storytellers. That's what we are. And so some stories just have more facts than others, and some people have differing cognition in the sense that their cognition is more critical or analytical than others. So maybe they know how to tell stories better, or they're more clever at telling stories that fit into certain categories than other people. Who knows? Anyways, point I'm trying to make is that the reason why you see that with most people is because most people's attention is fixed, or no, that's not the word I want to use. Most people's attention is most relative to what's most expected. That's the way that I could put it. So whatever is most widely known, expected, or thought or felt about something, that's generally the concept that most people have in their mind of something. Now, why that is or whatever is because we're social, and I'm not going to go into that very much. But something that's true about creative people is that a creative person, they're going to see a slug and they're going to think that's a slug. Then they're going to watch the thing move around, or they see it do something interesting, and they're like, oh, I wonder what that means. Like, why do they do that? And then they notice that the slime trails that they leave around are made of a certain kind of content, because they'll probably touch it, because they're not as disgust sensitive as, say, super conscientious people, and so they're like, that's interesting. I don't feel anything or see anything like that comes out of my body or the bodies of other people or human beings, like what's going on there. And they'll look more into it. And they'll also probably pour salt on slugs because they've seen people do that, and it's just very fascinating because you don't see people melt spontaneously when they come into contact with a certain substance. So why the hell this thing is doing it is so, oh my god, what is this? It's like a new vista has been opened and you don't understand. And so you're compelled by it because it's uncanny. So the creative mind, or the creative attention, is so awe or wonderstruck with things that are uncanny. And whatever seems to be uncanny, we move towards like a lot. And that's why I would say that the creative mind is the roaming mind. Because a creative person, they may have the same idea as everybody else about slugs, but chances are they don't. Because if slugs are relevant to their experience or something like that, or they've had the opportunity to experience them or whatever, they've looked up things about them, they've learned certain aspects of certain things about aspects of slugs or whatever, and this is what informs their ideas or whatever, because they go around borrowing lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of perspectives. They're perspectival seeking. They're extremely perspectival seeking because there's a lot of interesting things in the world that they don't understand or they don't know. They just think it's interesting. Or they'll bother to paint something or draw something because when they poured the salt on the slug, that was very surprising. Everybody's, well, I don't know if everybody has, but everybody's seen salt paint poured on a slug. I don't know if very many people want to paint it and then try to capture the emotional state of the slug as it's experiencing the salting, because that may be very surprising, strange, and graphic to human imagination. It may not agree with our emotions, the things that we like to see represented or something, but this is also why creative people have a roaming mind, and why creative people offend a lot of people in terms of whatever it is that they do or they think, because they're exploratory. A roaming mind is exploratory. Most people are not exploratory. People are exploratory to a certain extent, and people know that it pays to have an edge on other people in terms of the amount of information that they know, or how intelligent that they seem, or how educated they seem, because our culture is very much so socially stratified in terms of class systems, and it is the case that the most elite among us tend to have higher, more powerful, and potent educational experiences than the vast majority. And so all of these things influence as to why people have certain interests and whatever. But then there's just a group of people, or a class of people, I would call them, that are strange because they just are roaming. Their minds roam and roam and roam and roam and roam and roam and roam about. Will it ever reach some place that's relevant to other people? Who the fuck knows? Sorry, excuse me. But creative people have a greater prospect of being utter losers than other people. That's why it annoys me when people talk about being creative, because it's very sad sometimes being a creative person or seeing creative people, because they just have a roaming mind. They're just going to be that way. They can't do anything about it. Sometimes that means they can fit into jobs and situations well. Sometimes it means that they won't. Most creative people will not be highly successful or even make a living off of their art or their ideas, but they're just supposed to be a certain way, and it is what it is. And so most people are not like that. And creative people are also a bit more emotionally aware of their experience and the experience of other people in the world. And this has another sort of consequence, I would say. And we should not mistake, well, it's more rationalization. When everybody says everybody's creative or whatever, it's just another rationalization. There's not a hope for there to be 1,000 or 1,000,000 Einsteins in the world. That's something that you people hear. Maybe you have people that are looked over or something like that due to aspects of discrimination or something. But even if you had a non-racist world, the total number of people that are even going to come from any particular group that are as creative and cognitively able as, say, Albert Einstein is a very small minority. Even David Bowie, who the hell you want to pick, that people really say, oh my gosh, where are all the other ones like this one? People are just self-organizing phenomenon. And maybe there is a lot of similarity in people, and maybe there's whatever, but there's a reason why the creative people are recognized as the creative people and for who they are and not mistaken for other people, because that's part of what it means to be creative. Because I think this, that creative people have different personalities, and so this leads to different strands or veins of interest, proclivity, or taste. But one of the things that creative people can't help is that they're going to follow their proclivities. Their minds are going to roam towards that which interests them, that which they are creative, no, not creative, curious about, that which seems to have more meaning or beckons or calls them towards a certain direction than other people. And whether or not other people are going to understand it or have a similar set of experiences is just going to be a random crapshoot. Who knows? But suffice to say that creative people are not like other people. And most people are not creative, because to be creative means you have a roaming mind. And maybe some people are going to now try the exercise of allowing my mind to roam and seeing what comes about. I don't know, but I would say this, that part of the reason why I have a lot of ideas and part of the reason why I'm always thinking things is because whenever I'm not doing something, it happens. So I don't tell myself to think, and I don't tell myself to be prospective seeking or to find ideas or something like that. It sort of just happens. I also don't tell myself to notice patterns. It sort of just happens. It very much is surprising or dawns on me. Not really, well, it's my default. And whenever you're asking yourself, like, who do you want to be in a competition with? The thing that seems to be more like a fish in water. Like, so you don't want to be in a competition with a fish in a swimming match. Maybe certain fish are faster than others. Maybe that's the discussion we should be having. Some creative people are like swordfish. Other people are like goldfish or salmon or something like that. But we're all fish and we're all swimming. That's why people should stay out of the race. Like, non-creative people, what they see is like a lot of money being made within Western societies within recent years, and so they think, "Ooh, I'd like to try my hand at that too." And maybe for a time, because creative people are not very organizing and we're not very, and IQ is hit or miss, because you may not have very high IQ being a highly creative person. We're not going to be the top achievers often. But I'd put it like this, that as time goes on, the creative people are going to find the spaces and the domains that are for them. And eventually I don't know, so maybe conscientious people are always going to take over everything. Who knows? But conscientious people are not creative. They're not. Most people aren't creative because they're very constricted or inhibited, not just in terms of their perspective seeking, but even within their emotions and the willingness they have in exploring their own mind or experiencing themselves. Which is why NFs and NTs, to a relative extent, are usually more creative as personality types, because we're at the very least more willing to entertain the subjectivity of self. And most people are afraid of themselves. And so that's another discussion, but that's also too why a lot of people are not very creative. Maybe the way that I'm phrasing these things or saying these things, it will seem to indicate that there's a hope or a potential for other people to also unleash their creativity if they just get more in touch with themselves. But I'm a bit less optimistic about that, because I think neurology doesn't tell that story, because, well, it is what it is. So that's my video on why most people are not creative. Thank you for watching.